He needed a signature to save his crew. She needed a miracle to save her life. Captain Eamon Ironheart expected the governor's niece to be a plain, pliable spinster, a business transaction in lace. Instead, he found Serafina, battered, beautiful, and terrified, carrying secrets that could hang them both. In a world of cutthroats and corruption, a marriage of convenience becomes a dangerous game of survival. But as the storm clouds gather over La Boca, the fiercest battle won't be for the ship, but for the heart of the man who swore never to love again. The heat in La Boca harbor was a physical thing, a heavy, wet blanket smelling of tar, rotting kelp, and the overly sweet scent of roasting papaya. Captain Eamon Ironheart Drake stood at the edge of the governor's private dock, his boots planted wide, his shadow stretching long and sharp against the bleached wood. He did not fidget, he did not sweat, or at least he did not let it show. He was a man carved from the same oak as his ship, the St. Tempest, which bobbed aggressively in the deeper water, her cannons hidden, but her threat visible to anyone with eyes. "He's late," Maeve Klein muttered from half a step behind him. She was cleaning her fingernails with a rigging knife, her eyes scanning the rooftops rather than the carriage approaching down the cobblestone drive. "Rojas is testing you, making the pirate wait in the sun like a beggar." "Let him test," Eamon said, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the air. "I'm not here for his manners, Maeve. I'm here for the signature." The signature, the charter, the piece of parchment that would turn the St. Tempest from a hunted wolf into a privateer's hound. It was the only way to keep his crew from the gallows, and the price was simple: a marriage. Governor Esteban Rojas needed a dangerous man to secure his trade routes. But he needed that man tied to his household. A niece, he'd said. A plain woman of 30, quiet, pious, and useful for managing a household, while Eamon managed the sea. Eamon had pictured her 100 times. Stern, possibly sour, clutching a Bible and looking at him with disdain. He could handle disdain. He could handle a business partner. The carriage, a black lacquer box drawn by 2 sweating bays, rattled to a halt. The driver, a man in the governor's livery who looked more like a jailer than a servant, hopped down and threw the door open with unnecessary force. Eamon stepped forward, ready to offer a stiff bow and a stiffer arm. But the woman who stumbled out did not look like a partner. She looked like a casualty. The crowd of dockworkers and fishmongers fell silent. The woman gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. She was young, far too young for a spinster niece, and she was devastating. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was plastered to her cheek as if she had been dunked in seawater minutes ago. Her dress was fine lace, but it was buttoned wrong at the collar, hasty and crooked, and she was terrified. Eamon stopped 3 paces away. He saw the way her chest heaved, shallow and fast. He saw the bruise blooming like a violet on her upper arm. And then, as she reached out to steady herself, the sleeve of her gown slipped up. Rope burns, raw, red and weeping, encircling her wrists. Eamon's eyes snapped up to her face. She looked at him, and for a heartbeat, he thought she would scream. Her eyes were wide, the color of storm glass, and they locked onto his with a desperation that hit him harder than a rogue wave. She didn't scream. She stumbled forward, ignoring the driver who tried to grab her elbow, and nearly fell into Eamon. He caught her by instinct, his large hands gripping her shoulders to steady her. She flinched violently at his touch, a full-body shudder, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her voice a cracked whisper that only he could hear. "Please," she breathed, the words scraping her throat. "Please, don't send me back." Eamon froze. The heat of the harbor seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't a marriage. This was a disposal. "Steady," Eamon said, his voice dropping to that dangerous register he used before giving the order to fire. He looked over her head at the driver, who was now shifting uncomfortably. "Is this the governor's niece?" Serafina Rojas, the driver spat, looking at the ground. She's your problem now, Captain. Governor's compliments. Eamon looked down at her. Serafina. She was trembling so hard her teeth were about to chatter. He felt a sudden, violent urge to draw the pistol at his belt and shoot the driver. But discipline, the iron bands around his heart, held him fast. Maeve, Eamon said. Aye, Captain. Maeve had stopped cleaning her nails. Her hand was now resting on the hilt of her cutlass. Escort Mistress Rojas to the ship. Put her in my cabin. If anyone looks at her sideways, you tell me. Serafina looked up at him, confusion warring with her terror. Your cabin? You are my wife, according to the law of this port, Eamon said, his tone leaving no room for argument, though he loosened his grip on her shoulders instantly. Which means you are under my protection, and on my ship, my protection is absolute. He offered her his arm, formally, waiting to see if she would flinch again. She hesitated, eyeing the thick muscle of his forearm, the scar running down his wrist. Then, with the air of someone stepping off a cliff, she laid her hand on his sleeve. Her fingers were ice cold. The walk to the St. Tempest was a gauntlet. The crew had lined the rail, eager to see the governor's bargain. They were rough men, starved of softness. And their jeers died in their throats when they saw her. They didn't see a prize, they saw a broken bird. Baptiste Leclerc, the quartermaster, met them at the gangplank. He was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and eyes that weighed everything in gold. He took one look at Serafina, then at the rope marks, and his lips thinned. We are provisioned, Captain, Baptiste said, ignoring the girl entirely. But the tide is turning. Then we leave, Eamon said. Now. He led Serafina below decks. The air grew cooler, smelling of timber and lamp oil. He opened the door to the great cabin, his sanctuary. It was austere, tidy, dominated by a large chart table and a wide stern window that looked out over the retreating wake. Stay here, Eamon commanded. He didn't mean to sound harsh, but he didn't know how to be anything else. Serafina moved into the room, hugging her arms around herself. She looked at the heavy oak desk, the rack of maps, the narrow bed bolted to the wall. She turned back to him, her eyes searching his face for the cruelty she clearly expected. What do you want from me? She whispered. Eamon stood in the doorway, filling the frame. He was a large man, too large for polite society, with dark hair tied back and a beard that hid the tension in his jaw. He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt that dangerous surge of desire, not just for her beauty, which was undeniable even in her ruin, but for the mystery of her. She was a puzzle he hadn't asked for. I want you to breathe, Eamon said roughly, and I want you to eat. There is water in the pitcher. I will return when we clear the breakwater. Okay, he closed the door before she could answer, and only when the latch clicked did he let out the breath he'd been holding. He stared at the wood grain of the door. Don't send me back. He had expected a signature. He had walked away with a soul. Night fell over the Caribbean like a heavy velvet curtain. The St. Tempest was under full sail, the hull groaning rhythmically as it cut through the swell. In the great cabin, the lantern swung in a slow arc, casting shifting shadows against the bulkheads. Serafina sat on the edge of the bed. She had washed the salt from her face and hands, but the water in the basin was pink with blood from her wrists. She had found a tin of salve in a drawer. It smelled of menthol and tar, and applied it gingerly. The door opened. She stiffened, her spine snapping straight. Eamon entered. He had removed his heavy coat, revealing a white linen shirt and a leather vest. He carried a tray with a bowl of stew and hardtack. He set it on the chart table without looking at her. Eat, he said. I'm not hungry. I didn't ask if you were hungry. I told you to eat. He turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, his eyes dark in the lantern light. Starving women die at sea, Serafina, and I don't haul corpses. It was a harsh thing to say, but Serafina heard the strange note beneath it. Concern? No, practicality. He was a captain. She was cargo. She stood up and went to the table. The stew smelled of onions and salted beef. She took a spoon, her hand trembling so badly the utensil clattered against the wood. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the reprimand. A large, warm hand covered hers. She gasped, her eyes flying open. Eamon wasn't gripping her, he was steadying her. His hand engulfed hers completely, calloused and rough. Yet he applied no pressure. "The ship moves," he said softly. "You have to move with it. Don't fight the roll. Lean into it." He withdrew his hand slowly. Serafina took a breath, timed it with the sway of the floor, and managed to lift the spoon. She took a bite. It was hot and salty. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Eamon pointed to a hammock bundled in the corner. "I sleep across the door." "But this is your bed." "It was," Eamon corrected. "Now it is yours." "Why?" Eamon poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher, taking a long drink before answering. He leaned against the bulkhead, crossing his arms. "Because you flinch when a floorboard creaks, Serafina. If I tried to share that bunk with you, you'd stop breathing entirely. I need a wife for the charter, not a martyr." He watched her finish the stew. She ate with the manners of a high-born lady, delicate and precise, despite the setting. "Who did that to your wrists?" Eamon asked suddenly. Serafina froze. She pulled her sleeves down. "It was a misunderstanding with the dressmaker." "Lies don't work on this ship," Eamon said flatly. "The wind carries them away, but keep your secrets if you must. Just know that on the St. Tempest, no one touches you. Not the crew, not the officers." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "And not me, unless you ask for it." Serafina looked at him, confused by the code he lived by. He was a pirate, a privateer, the governor had called him. But she knew the difference was only a piece of paper. Yet he offered her more dignity in 5 hours than her uncle had in 5 years. "Thank you," she whispered. Eamon grunted, blew out the lantern, and settled into the darkness by the door. But Serafina lay awake for hours, listening to his steady breathing, wondering why the most dangerous man in Laboca was the first one who made her feel safe. 2 weeks passed. The St. Tempest patrolled the trade lanes, hunting for the flags of rival nations, but finding only empty horizons. Life aboard the ship was a clockwork of discipline. Serafina learned to walk the deck without stumbling. She learned that the morning bell meant scrubbing, and the evening bell meant ration distribution. She stayed mostly in the cabin or on the quarterdeck, out of the way, as Eamon had instructed. But she was bored, and Serafina Rojas had never been good at being idle. She began to watch. She watched Maeve shout orders that sent men scrambling up the ratlines like spiders. She watched the cook sharpen his knives. And she watched Baptiste Leclerc wrestle with the ship's ledgers on a barrel top near the helm. It was a scorching afternoon when Eamon found her standing over Baptiste's shoulder. The quartermaster was sweating, cursing softly in French, his quill hovering over a column of numbers. "It doesn't balance," Baptiste growled, scratching his head. "We are missing 3 casks of powder from the manifest." "You carried the 4 wrong," a soft voice said. Baptiste jumped. Eamon, standing near the wheel, turned his head. Serafina was pointing at the ledger. "There," she said, her finger hovering over the ink, but not touching it. "In the provisions column, you marked the unit cost as 4 reals, but the total sum implies 7. You carried the wrong integer to the next column." Baptiste blinked. He looked at the number. He did the math on his fingers. Then he looked at Serafina with wide eyes. "She is right," Baptiste muttered. "Mon Dieu, she is right." Eamon walked over, his boots thudding on the deck. "You can read ledgers?" Serafina shrank back slightly, realizing she had spoken out of turn. My uncle, he disliked hiring clerks. He said family was cheaper. I did the household accounts, and the port taxes for the merchant vessels." Eamon stared at her, a woman who looked like a porcelain doll, who flinched at loud noises but who understood the complex tax codes of Laboca. "Give her the quill," Eamon ordered. "Captain?" Baptiste asked. "Give her the quill, Baptiste." The quartermaster handed it over. Serafina took it, the feather feeling familiar and grounding in her hand. "Fix it," Eamon said. She bent over the barrel. Her handwriting was elegant, sharp, and fast. She corrected the error, tallied the column, and balanced the page in under a minute. When she straightened up, she found Eamon studying her with a new expression. It wasn't desire, and it wasn't pity. It was respect. "Useful," Eamon said quietly. "Very useful." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the helmsman couldn't hear. "If you can read tax ledgers, can you read codes?" Serafina hesitated. "Some. Uncle Esteban, he liked secrets." "Good," Eamon said, "because I think we're going to need that." The air on the ship changed after that. The crew still didn't speak to her. Eamon's order was law, but the sneers disappeared. They saw her working with Baptiste, her head bent over manifests, ink staining her fingertips. A working hand was a respected hand. But as Serafina grew bolder, Eamon grew more distant. He spent his nights on deck, pacing. When he did sleep in the cabin, he turned his back to her immediately. He was fighting a war inside his own skull. Every time she looked at him with those intelligent gray eyes, he wanted to cross the room. He wanted to know what she was thinking. He wanted to know if her skin was as soft as it looked. Desire was a poison. He knew this. It made you sloppy. And he could not afford to be sloppy, not with the rumors reaching them from passing fishing boats. Calder Knox was hunting them. Knox was a rival captain, a man with no charter and no morals, who wanted Eamon's territory. And the word was out. Eamon Ironheart had gone soft. He had taken a bride. He was domesticated. Eamon stood at the rail, watching the sun dip below the horizon, turning the sea to blood. "Captain," he turned. Serafina was there, holding a small wooden box. She looked nervous again. "A cutter brought this from the mainland while you were aloft," she said. "It has the governor's seal." "The dowry chest." Eamon took the box. It was heavy. A bit late for wedding gifts. "It's not a gift," Serafina said, her voice trembling. "I know that box. Uncle Esteban keeps his insurance in boxes like that." Eamon set it on the rail and pried the lid open with his knife. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a thick, leather-bound book. No gold, no jewels, just a book. He opened it. It was nonsense. Rows of dates, shipping manifests for ships that didn't exist, and cargo lists for spices that weighed too much. "It's a record," Serafina whispered, stepping closer to look. "Bribes, illicit cargo, patrol schedules." "Why give this to me?" Eamon asked. "Because now you have it," she said, looking up at him. "If you keep it, you are complicit in his crimes. If you try to turn it in, he will say you stole it to blackmail him. He has handed you a bomb, Eamon, and he expects you to hold it so he can control when it explodes." Eamon looked at the book, then at her. She was right. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. "He thinks I'm a brute," Eamon said. "A pirate who can barely sign his name. He doesn't know I have you." Serafina flushed, a touch of color hitting her pale cheeks. "I can decode it, but not here. I need a reference key. He usually hides them in religious texts." "Then it is fortunate," Eamon said grimly, "that we are due in La Boca tomorrow for the Feast of St. Elmo." The return to La Boca was tense. The St. Tempest anchored under the guns of the fort, a display of confidence Eamon didn't entirely feel. The Feast of St. Elmo was a holy day for sailors, a day of blessing the masts and lighting candles for the drowned. It was also a day where the governor expected his new nephew to show his face. Eamon dressed in his finest coat, a deep blue wool with silver buttons. He strapped his sword belt on tight. Serafina wore a dress of sea-green silk that Maeve had miraculously acquired from a merchant prize months ago. It fit her better than the lace she'd arrived in. "Stay close to me," Eamon told her as they boarded the longboat. "Do not speak to anyone unless I signal." The port was alive with noise. Drums beat a frantic rhythm from the courtyards, and the air was thick with the smoke of incense and roasting pork. Streamers of blue and gold fluttered from every balcony. They walked up the main thoroughfare toward the chapel. The crowd parted for Aemon, eyes wide. He was a legend here, the monster who had been tamed. Or so they thought. Seraphina held his arm, her grip tight. She kept her head down, the brim of her bonnet hiding her face. They reached the chapel steps. A group of men stood there, dressed in the velvet doublets of the bureaucracy. In the center was a man with a face like a ferret, smiling with too many teeth. Comptroller Armand Vel, the governor's right hand. Aemon felt Seraphina stop dead. "Captain Drake," Vel called out, his voice oily. "And the lovely bride. We were beginning to worry the sea had swallowed you." Seraphina made a sound, a small, strangled whimper. She began to back away. Aemon looked at her. Her face had gone ash white. She wasn't just afraid. She was in the grip of a panic so pure it overrode her training. She was looking at Vel's hands. Vel wore heavy rings, gold, square-cut rings. Aemon looked at the rings, then at the faint, fading bruises on Seraphina's arm that she usually covered. The shape matched. Rage, white-hot and blinding, detonated in Aemon's chest. "Mistress Rojas is unwell," Aemon said, stepping between Seraphina and the comptroller. His voice was a growl. "Nonsense," Vel said, stepping forward. "She looks radiant. Come, my dear, give your old friend a kiss on the cheek." Vel reached out. Aemon moved. It was a blur of motion. One hand caught Vel's wrist, twisting it violently until the man yelped and dropped to his knees. The other hand rested on the pommel of Aemon's sword, not drawing it, but promising death. The crowd gasped. The drums stopped. "Touch her," Aemon whispered, leaning down so only Vel could hear. "And I will carve you into bait and feed you to the sharks in the harbor. Do you understand?" Vel nodded frantically, sweat popping on his forehead. Aemon shoved him back. He turned, scooped his arm around Seraphina's waist, firmly, protectively, and marched her away from the chapel, back toward the docks. "The ceremony," Seraphina gasped, trying to keep up with his long strides. "Damn the ceremony," Aemon snarled. They didn't stop until they were back in the longboat, rowing furiously toward the ship. Aemon didn't speak. He stared at the horizon, his jaw working. When they were back in the safety of the great cabin, Aemon slammed the door and locked it. Seraphina stood in the center of the room, shaking. He is the one who," she started. "I know," Aemon said. He turned to her. The anger was gone, replaced by a fierce, terrifying intensity. "He is the one who marked you." Seraphina nodded, tears finally spilling over. "My uncle, he let them. To teach me obedience, to make me agree to the marriage." Aemon walked over to her. He stopped inches away. The air between them crackled. This wasn't the bargain anymore. This wasn't politics. "I have been trying," Aemon said, his voice rough, "to keep you at a distance, to keep you safe from my world. But I see now that my world is the only thing that can keep you safe from theirs." He reached out and for the first time touched her face. His thumb brushed away a tear. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "We are going to decode that book, Seraphina," Aemon vowed. "And then we're going to burn their world down. Are you with me?" Seraphina opened her eyes. The fear was still there, but behind it, steel was forming. "I am with you," she whispered. "Good," Aemon said, "because the charter is just paper now. This is war." The candle flame flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the oak walls of the captain's cabin. Outside, the sea was uncharacteristically quiet, the Sate tempest gliding through black water like a ghost. But inside, the air was thick with the scent of basil and heated lemon. Seraphina held the heavy leather-bound book open near the flame. To the naked eye, the page was blank, a wasted sheet of expensive parchment. But as she carefully waved it over the heat, brown script began to bloom from the paper like bruising on skin. Aemon stood behind her, one hand resting on the back of her chair, the other gripping the edge of the table. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, a steady, solid presence that made her own trembling hands steady. "Citrus juice and milk," Sarah murmured, her eyes scanning the emerging lines. an old trick from the convent school. The nuns used it for prayers they didn't want the priests to read. Uncle Esteban uses it for sins he doesn't want the king to see. "Read it," Eamon commanded softly. "It's a ledger of payouts," she said, her finger tracing the brown letters. "To the harbor master, to the magistrate, and here, schedules." She paused, her breath hitching. "Eamon, look." He leaned in, his cheek brushing her hair. The contact sent a jolt through him, but he forced his eyes to the page. It was a list of ships. Beside each name was a date and a location. The Red Mare, September 4th, North Shoals. The Gilded Lady, September 12th, Dead Man's Cut. "Those ships were taken by the Spanish patrol," Eamon said, his voice dropping to a growl. "Sunk with all hands. We thought it was bad luck." "It wasn't luck," Sarah whispered. "It was a sale. He's selling the coordinates of privateers to the Spanish Navy. He takes your bribe for the charter, then sells your location to the hunters to clear the competition." Eamon's eyes scanned down the list until he found it. The St. Tempest, October 15th, the betrothal celebration. Silence stretched in the cabin, heavy and cold. The date was 3 weeks away. The governor didn't intend for Eamon to marry his niece and sail into the sunset. He intended to parade them at the celebration, secure his political standing, and then hand Eamon over to the hangman while the Tempest was ambushed at anchor. "He never expected you to read this," Eamon said, straightening up. The rage was back, but it was cold now, calculated. "He thought he gave me a meaningless book to test my obedience." "He thinks I'm too afraid to speak," Sarah added, closing the book. "And he thinks you are too simple to listen." Eamon looked down at her. In the golden light of the lantern, she didn't look like a victim. Her jaw was set, her eyes clear. She looked like a conspirator. "We have the evidence," Eamon said. "But evidence means nothing if we're at the bottom of the sea. We need to survive until the 15th. And we need the crew to trust us," Sarah said quietly. Eamon frowned. "The crew obeys me." "Obedience is not trust, Captain," she said, daring to look him in the eye. "They watch me like I am a bomb waiting to go off. If they think I am dragging them into a trap, let them think what they will," Eamon said, turning away to hide the doubt in his own eyes. "I am the captain. That is enough." But it wasn't enough. The poison spread slowly at first, carried on the wind of gossip that blew from the supply sloops they met near the Tortugas. Calder Knox, Eamon's rival, was not a man of subtle strategies, but he knew how to plant a seed. By the time the St. Tempest turned south, the whispers were audible. "The girl is a spy. She writes letters in the dark. She marks our position." Eamon stood on the quarterdeck, watching the sullen efficiency of his men. They worked, but they didn't sing. They avoided the stern of the ship where Sierra walked. "You need to speak to them," Maeve said, appearing at his elbow. She didn't look at him. She watched the horizon. "They are saying she signals the patrols with a mirror." "It's nonsense," Eamon snapped. "She has been in my sight every moment." "They don't see what you see, Eamon," Maeve warned. "They see a governor's niece. They see soft hands and lace. And they see a captain who is spending more time in his cabin than on his deck." "Are you questioning me, Maeve?" "I am questioning your survival instincts," she shot back. "Knox is out there. If he hits us while the men are looking over their shoulders at your wife, we lose." Eamon gripped the rail until the wood groaned. He wanted to crush the rumors, to beat the truth into them, but he knew Maeve was right. Fear was a rot. Before he could answer, the lookout's cry shattered the tension. "Sail ho! Off the starboard bow! Interceptor colors!" Eamon raised his spyglass. It was a sleek, fast sloop, flying no flag, but the cut of her jib was aggressive. A mercenary vessel. One of Knox's dogs, come to test the wolf. "Beat to quarters," Eamon roared, the indecision vanishing instantly. "Run out the guns!" The ship exploded into motion. Eamon turned to find Sarah standing near the companionway, looking pale but rooted to the spot. "Get below," he barked at her. "To the bilge. It's the safest place." "I can help carry powder," she said. her voice trembling but stubborn. "You will get in the hold, or I will tie you there." The ferocity in his voice made her flinch, the old fear flashing in her eyes. She turned and ran, disappearing below decks. Eamon cursed himself, but there was no time. The enemy ship fired a warning shot that splashed 50 yards off their beam. The skirmish was brutal and short. The St. Tempest was a heavy brig, outgunned in speed but superior in weight. Eamon took the wheel himself, bringing the ship around hard, eating the wind to bring his broadside to bear. Fire! The cannons roared, the ship shuddering violently. Smoke choked the air. Below decks, Sarah did not go to the bilge. She went to the surgery. The ship's surgeon, a grizzled man named Doc, was preparing his saws. When the first casualty was carried down, a boy with a splinter the size of a dagger in his thigh, Sarah didn't scream. She stepped forward. "Hold his shoulders," she told the man carrying him. "I have the tourniquet." Doc looked at her surprised, but he nodded. For 20 minutes, the world was the sound of cannon fire and the smell of blood. Sarah held limbs down. She handed instruments. Her dress was ruined, stained with red, her hair falling from its pins. When the silence finally fell, signaling the enemy had fled or sunk, Eamon came storming down to the lower deck, checking for damage. He found her in the surgery, wiping her hands on a rag. He stopped dead. The sight of her, blood on her hands, sweat on her brow, hit him like a physical blow. "I told you to go to the bilge," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Sarah looked up, exhausted. "And leave Doc alone? He has 2 hands, Eamon. He needed 4. You could have been killed." "I am on a pirate ship," she said, tossing the rag into a bucket. "We could all be killed. Stop treating me like glass." "You are glass," Eamon shouted, the fear finally breaking through his discipline. "And if you break, He stopped. The crewmen in the surgery, the wounded boy, the surgeon, the carriers, were staring. Eamon Ironheart never shouted. Eamon Ironheart was ice. He turned on his heel and left. But the damage was done. He hadn't sounded like a captain protecting his crew. He had sounded like a man terrified of losing his heart. The victory over the interceptor bought them silence, but not peace. The air grew heavy, the sky turning a bruised purple-green. The barometer in the cabin dropped so low the needle tapped the glass. A storm was coming, a true hurricane. The preparations were frantic. Everything loose was lashed down. The cannons were double secured. The hatches were battened. "Go to the cabin," Eamon told Sarah. The wind was already picking up, whipping her hair across her face. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anything." "I can help in the galley," she argued, shouting over the rising wind. "The stove needs to be—" "Cabin!" Eamon roared, grabbing her arm and marching her to the door. He shoved her inside, and, for the first time, he slid the heavy iron bolt on the outside. "Eamon!" she screamed, pounding on the door. "No, don't lock me in." "It's for your own good," he yelled back, though the words tasted like ash. The storm hit an hour later, with the force of a hammer. The St. Tempest was tossed like a toy. Waves crashed over the deck, burying the rails in foaming white water. Inside the cabin, Sarah was thrown from the bed to the wall. The lanterns smashed. Darkness swallowed her. She crawled to the door sobbing, not from fear of the storm, but from the terror of the lock, the confinement. It was the governor's closet all over again. The helplessness. Safe is not free. She felt around in the dark until her hand closed over the heavy brass fire poker near the stove. She wedged it into the crack of the doorframe. She pushed. She leveraged her panic into strength. The wood groaned. On deck, chaos reigned. The main topsail had torn loose, flapping like a demon's wing and threatening to snap the mast. "Cut it loose!" Eamon bellowed, blinded by rain. Men scrambled, slipping on the slick wood. Maeve was at the rail, shouting orders. But her voice was lost in the roar. Then, a figure appeared from the companionway. Not a ghost, a woman. Sarah crawled onto the deck. She didn't stand. Standing was death. She stayed low, moving with the roll of the ship. She saw the bucket line struggling to clear the waist of the ship where water was pooling dangerously fast. She didn't ask for permission. She grabbed a bucket that had slid loose and joined the line. Maeve saw her first. The first mate froze for a second, watching the fragile bride heave a gallon of water over the rail, her face set in a grimace of effort. "She's out!" Maeve yelled, pointing. Eamon turned. He saw her. His heart stopped. She was soaked, tiny against the violence of the ocean, fighting for his ship. He started toward her, intending to drag her back, but a wave crashed over the bow, knocking him to his knees. When he wiped the water from his eyes, she was still there. She had fallen, but she was getting up. She was bailing water. She wasn't glass. She was iron. The storm raged for 6 hours. When the winds finally died down to a manageable gale, the sun was beginning to rise, gray and weak. The deck was a ruin of tangled rope and splintered wood. The crew sat slumped against the bulwarks, exhausted. Eamon found Sarah sitting near the mainmast, shivering uncontrollably. Her hands were raw, the rope burns on her wrists aggravated and bleeding again. He dropped to his knees in front of her. He was shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard. "I locked the door," he rasped. "I broke it," she said, her teeth chattering. "You could have been washed overboard. You could have been crushed." He was angry, but the anger had no heat. It was just fear, naked and ugly. "I know," she said. "Why?" Eamon demanded. "Why did you come out?" Sarah looked up at him. Her eyes were rimmed with red, salt-crusted, but fierce. "Because safe isn't the same as free, Eamon," she whispered. "You locked me in the dark, just like them. You promised to protect me, but you didn't ask if I wanted to be kept in a cage." The words cut him deeper than any cutlass. He looked at her battered hands, then at the crew. Maeve was watching them. She didn't look scornful. She looked approving. I thought, approving. Eamon started, then stopped. He took a breath. "I thought I was saving you." "I don't need a savior," Sarah said, reaching out to take his hand. "I need a captain, and a captain needs a crew. All of the crew." Eamon closed his eyes, pressing her hand to his forehead. He surrendered. He surrendered the idea of the innocent girl he had to shield from the world. "Get dry," he said softly. "Get warm, and then meet me on the quarterdeck." The sea was calm the next day, a deceptive mirror. Eamon stood by the wheel, a collection of items laid out on a cloth, a flintlock pistol, a heavy dirk, and a small, balanced throwing knife. Sarah arrived, wearing dry clothes, trousers cut down from a cabin boy's slops, and a shirt tied at the waist. She looked ridiculous and magnificent. "If you're going to refuse to stay below," Eamon said, "you need to know how to ensure you don't die." He picked up the knife. Balance, weight, intent. "You don't throw with your arm. You throw with your eye." He handed it to her. She waited. It felt heavy, alien. "Show me," she said. For an hour, he taught her. He moved her arm, adjusting her stance, his chest pressed against her back, his hand guiding hers. The physical proximity was intoxicating. The smell of the sea, the heat of the sun, the lingering adrenaline of the storm. "Like this," he murmured, his mouth inches from her ear. "Breath out. Release." She threw. The knife thudded into the mast, biting deep into the wood. Sarah turned in his arms, smiling. "I did it." Eamon looked down at her. Her face was flushed, her lips parted. The distance between them vanished. He forgot the charter. He forgot the governor. He saw only the woman who had fought a hurricane for him. He leaned in. Her eyes fluttered shut. "Captain!" The shout from the waist of the ship broke the moment like glass. Eamon pulled back, breathless, his eyes dark. Maeve was dragging a man by the collar of his shirt. It was distinctive, a red-striped shirt, one of the new gunners. Found him near the stern lantern, Maeve spat, throwing the man to the deck. With a shuttered lamp, he was signaling. The crew gathered around, their faces hard. The camaraderie of the storm was gone, replaced by the suspicion of the mutiny. Eamon stepped forward, the tenderness of the lesson gone. He was the wolf of La Boca again. Signaling who? Eamon asked, his voice quiet. The man looked up, defiant. Knox. He's right behind us. He knows about the book, Captain. He knows about the spy you bed. He spat at Sarah's feet. He promised a share of the governor's reward to anyone who marked the ship. Eamon looked at the horizon. It was empty, but he could feel the pressure. Knox was coming, and the governor was waiting. Put him in the brig, Eamon ordered, and double the watch. He turned to Sarah. The knife was still stuck in the mast, vibrating slightly in the wind. The lesson is over, Eamon said grimly. Now the test begins. The brig of the St. Tempest was a cramped, foul-smelling cage near the keel, where the sound of the water rushing past the hull was a constant, deafening roar. Eamon stood outside the bars, his face a mask of stone. Inside, the traitor, a man named Silas, sat slumped against the damp wood, nursing a split lip. Knox is a day behind, Silas sneered, spitting blood. He has a frigate, you have a brig. Do the math, Captain. You're sailing into a coffin. Eamon didn't shout. He didn't strike the bars. He simply watched the man with eyes that had seen too much death to be impressed by bravado. Knox isn't following us to fight, Eamon said quietly. He's hurting us, pushing us toward La Boca. Why? Silas laughed, a wet hacking sound. Because the governor wants a show. He doesn't just want you dead, Ironheart. He wants you broken. He wants the Pirate King to kneel before he swings. Eamon turned and walked away, leaving the man in the dark. He climbed the ladder to the main deck, the fresh air doing little to clear the taste of betrayal from his mouth. He found Sarah in the great cabin. She wasn't hiding. She was sitting at the chart table, the governor's ledger open, surrounded by scraps of paper covered in ciphers. She looked up as he entered, her face pale but composed. He's right, she said, tapping the map. Look at the patrol routes in the ledger. They've pulled back the Coast Guard from the southern approach. They've left a corridor wide open, straight to La Boca. A funnel, Eamon muttered, leaning over her shoulder. They want us to feel safe entering the harbor. It's a stage, Sarah corrected. Uncle Esteban loves theater. The betrothal celebration. It's not a party. It's a public execution. He'll arrest you the moment you step on the dock, claim you kidnapped me, and use the rescue to bolster his popularity. And you? Eamon asked, looking at her. What happens to the rescued niece? Sarah's eyes went dark. I go back to the house, to the silence, to the lessons in obedience until he finds another use for me. Eamon's hand clenched into a fist on the table. The thought of her returning to that house, to the men with rings and heavy hands, made the blood roar in his ears. We are not going back, he vowed. Not like that. 2 days later, the courier boat arrived. It was a small, fast cutter, flying the governor's personal ensign. It hailed them nervously, staying well out of cannon range until Eamon signaled permission to approach. The messenger was a young boy, trembling so hard he nearly dropped the scroll case. He handed it to Maeve at the rail and scrambled back to his boat as if the St. Tempest were plagued. Eamon broke the seal on the quarterdeck. The crew gathered below, silent, watching. An invitation, Eamon announced, his voice carrying to the main mast. His Excellency, Governor Rojas, requests the pleasure of Captain Drake and his bride at the Feast of the Union to celebrate the signing of the charter. A murmur went through the crew. Some looked hopeful. A charter meant legitimacy, safety, money. Others, the older hands, looked grim. It's a trap, Baptiste muttered. The cheese is in the metal, Captain. We know, Eamon said. He looked at Sarah, who stood by the rail, the wind whipping her skirts. She nodded imperceptibly. "We know it is a trap," Eamon continued, addressing the men. "If we run, we are outlaws. Nox will hunt us, the Spanish will hunt us, and we will starve slowly in the outer islands. If we fight," he paused, "if we fight, we walk into the lion's den. But we do not go as sheep." He held up the scroll. "He expects a pirate, a brute, who stumbles into the net. He does not expect us to bring our own teeth." Eamon ripped the invitation in half. "Prepare the ship. We sail for La Boca." The plan was madness. It relied on timing, on luck, and on a bottle of lemon juice. In the cabin, the air was thick with tension. Sarah worked with a steady hand, a quill dipped in the invisible ink solution. She was writing on a blank page, torn from the back of the ledger, a page she would then carefully insert into the middle of the book, replacing a genuine page of mundane cargo lists. "You have to be perfect," Eamon said, watching her. He was pacing, unable to sit. "One wrong stroke, one smudge, and Vel will know it's a forgery." "Vel is arrogant," Sarah murmured, her focus absolute. "He won't look for a forgery. He believes he is the only one clever enough to use this code." She was writing a correspondence, a fake letter from Comptroller Vel to a Spanish admiral offering to sell the governor's secrets for safe passage to Madrid. It was a lie, but it was a lie wrapped in the truth of their corruption. It turned the snakes against each other. "Done," she whispered, setting the quill down. She blew gently on the page. The writing vanished as it dried, leaving the paper looking innocent and white. "Now we age it," Eamon said. He took the page, crumpled it slightly, rubbed a faint trace of soot on the corner, and then slid it into the ledger's binding. He pressed the spine closed. "When we heat this page," Eamon said, "it will look like Vel has been betraying Rojas for months." Sarah looked up at him. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but her spirit was burning bright. "This relies on Rojas believing you over Vel," she said. "No," Eamon corrected. "It relies on Rojas being paranoid, and men who build their power on fear are always, always afraid." The night before they reached La Boca, the St. Tempest anchored in a small cove 10 miles south of the harbor. The fog had rolled in, thick and gray, hiding them from the shore. The ship was quiet. The men were sharpening steel, checking pistols, writing letters to women they might never see again. Eamon stood in the cabin, looking out the stern window at the nothingness. He heard the door open and close. He didn't turn. He knew her step. "The jolly boat is ready," Eamon said, his voice tight. "Baptiste has provisions in it. If you leave now, you can make it to St. Lucia in 3 days. I have friends there. You can change your name. You can be free." Silence. "Did you hear me, Sarah?" "I heard you," she said. Her voice was closer now. "I just don't agree with you." Eamon turned. She was standing in the center of the room. She had shed the rough trousers and shirt, and was wearing a simple white shift, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like a ghost, but a warm one. "You cannot walk into that plaza tomorrow," Eamon said, the desperation cracking his voice. If this goes wrong, if the governor doesn't take the bait, they will hang me, but they will keep you." "I know," she said. She took a step closer. "But I am done running, Eamon, and I am done being sent away for my own good." "Sarah, you told me once that you wanted to earn me," she whispered. She reached out and took his hand, the hand that had wielded swords, steered ships, and killed men. She pressed it to her chest, over her heart. "You have. You earned me in the storm. You earned me when you gave me the knife. You earned me when you looked at my scars and didn't look away." Eamon trembled. The discipline that had held him together for years, the iron bands of the captain, shattered. "I am terrified," he confessed, his voice breaking. "Not of dying, but of failing you." "Then don't fail," she said fiercely. And then, softer, "But tonight we are not in the plaza. We are here." She stepped into him, closing the distance. Eamon let out a ragged breath and wrapped his arms around her. She felt small against him, but solid, real. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, fueled by the shadow of the gallows and the fire of months of restraint. She kissed him back with equal force, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him down. There was no sleeping across the door that night. They moved to the narrow bunk, the ship swaying gently beneath them. Eamon worshipped her with a reverence that bordered on religious. He touched every scar, every bruise, claiming them, replacing the memory of pain with the heavy, grounding weight of his body. He treated her not like glass, but like something precious and durable, like gold, like iron, like the sea itself. And Sarah, for the first time in her life, did not flinch. She held on. She met his desire with her own, a fierce claiming of the man who had given her a knife instead of a cage. Later, in the dark, lying tangled together in the sheets, Eamon pressed a kiss to her temple. "If we die tomorrow," he whispered into her hair. "We won't," she said, her voice sleepy but sure. "Because you are the wolf of Laboka, and I," she smiled against his chest, "I am the wolf's wife." Eamon tightened his arms around her, staring into the dark, waiting for the dawn that would bring fire. The sun rose blood-red over Laboka. The Saint Tempest sailed into the harbor under full canvas, a brazen display of confidence. The Spanish flag snapped from the main mast, but beneath it, Eamon flew his own colors, a black tempest on a white field. The docks were packed. The governor had ensured a crowd. Soldiers in polished breastplates lined the pier. In the center of the plaza, a raised platform had been built, draped in red velvet. Governor Rojas sat there on a high-backed chair, looking like a king. Beside him stood Comptroller Vel, smirking. And behind them, lurking in the shadow of the customs house, was Calder Knox, his hand resting on his sword. The trap was set. Eamon steered the ship alongside the pier. The crew stood at the rails, armed to the teeth, but weapons sheathed. "Discipline. Ready?" Eamon asked, offering his arm to Sarah. She was dressed in the green silk again, her hair pinned up, the rope burns on her wrists, covered by lace cuffs. But at her waist, hidden in the folds of her skirt, was the throwing knife, and in her hand she carried the leather-bound book. "Ready?" she said. They walked down the gangplank together. The crowd went silent. They walked not like prisoners, but like royalty. Eamon scanned the rooftops. He saw the glint of muskets. He saw the way the soldiers shifted their weight. They reached the platform. Governor Rojas stood up, spreading his arms wide. "Captain Drake," he boomed, "and my beloved niece, welcome home. We have prepared a feast in your honor." "We are honored, Excellency," Eamon said, his voice projecting to the back of the crowd. He did not bow. Come up, Rojas gestured. "Let us sign the charter and make this union official." Eamon and Sarah ascended the stairs. Vel stepped forward, holding a quill and a parchment. "Just a signature, Captain," Vel purred. "And then we can discuss the dowry." "We brought the dowry," Sarah said clearly. Her voice rang out, surprising the governor. She lifted the book. "Ah," Rojas said, his smile faltering slightly. "My old ledger. You can give that to Mr. Vel." "I don't think so," Eamon said. He took the book from Sarah. "You see, Governor, we found something interesting in the pages. A gift, from Mr. Vel to the Spanish admiral." Vel's eyes widened. "What?" "A letter," Eamon continued, raising his voice so the soldiers could hear. "Offering to sell your secrets, Governor." "Offering to sell you." The crowd murmured. Rojas's smile vanished. He looked at Vel. "He lies," Vel shrieked. "It's a pirate trick, is it?" Eamon challenged. "Sarah?" Sarah stepped forward. She pulled a small vial of lemon juice from her sleeve. "Shall we test the pages, Uncle? Shall we see what is written in the invisible ink you taught me to read?" She opened the book to the forged page. She poured a drop of the acid onto the paper. It hissed slightly. Reacting with the treated parchment, brown letters began to appear. To Admiral de Vega, regarding the treason of Governor Rojas. Rojas saw his name. He saw Vel's handwriting, expertly mimicked by Sarah. The governor's face turned purple. Paranoia, the tyrant's disease, took hold instantly. "You traitorous swine!" Rojas roared, turning on Vel. "No, no, Excellency, it's a forgery!" Vel backed away. "Seize him!" Rojas screamed at the guards. Chaos erupted. The guards grabbed Vel. Knox, seeing the plan disintegrate, drew his sword and shouted, "Kill the pirate!" "Now!" Eamon yelled. On the ship, Maeve dropped her hand. The St. Tempest's cannons, loaded with grape shot but aimed high at the customs house roof, fired. The thunder was deafening. Debris rained down, creating panic. Eamon drew his cutlass. "Back to the ship!" He grabbed Sarah's hand. They didn't run, they fought. Knox lunged at Eamon, steel clashing against steel. Eamon parried, a brutal heavy blow that knocked Knox off balance. "Go!" Eamon shouted to Sarah, shoving her toward the gangplank. "Not without you!" she screamed. She pulled the knife from her skirt. A soldier lunged at Eamon's exposed back. Sarah didn't think, she threw. The knife took the soldier in the shoulder, spinning him around. Eamon finished Knox with a pommel strike to the temple, dropping the rival captain. He scooped Sarah up and sprinted for the ship. The crew was firing muskets over the heads of the crowd, creating a wall of smoke. Eamon and Sarah leaped onto the deck just as the gangplank was kicked away. "Sail!" Eamon roared. "Cut the lines!" The St. Tempest, already under tension, surged away from the dock as the ropes were severed. Musket balls whizzed through the rigging, tearing holes in the sails. But the wind caught the canvas. They were moving. They were leaving. Eamon stood at the stern, chest heaving, holding Sarah tight against him. On the dock, Rojas was screaming orders that no one could hear. Vel was being dragged away in chains, and Knox was groaning in the dirt. They watched La Boca shrink into the distance. "We lost the charter," Sarah said, breathless, her hair wild. Eamon looked down at her. He looked at the woman who had forged a treason, thrown a knife, and saved his life. "To hell with the charter," Eamon said, and he kissed her, right there in front of the cheering crew. "We have the horizon." The horizon was not empty. Eamon's declaration of freedom had been premature, a moment of triumph snatched from the jaws of a trap. But the trap had teeth. As the St. Tempest cleared the smoke of La Boca's harbor, the deep, resonant boom of the coastal fort's heavy guns echoed across the water. Geysers of spray erupted dangerously close to the brig's port side, soaking the deck and rattling the already stressed timbers. "They're bracketing us!" Maeve shouted from the waist, her voice cracking over the wind. "We've taken a hit to the mizzen yard. We're losing speed." Eamon stood at the wheel, fighting the kick of the rudder. He looked back. The port of La Boca was shrinking, but emerging from the shadow of the headland was a shape that chilled his blood. It wasn't Knox's sloop. It was a three-masted frigate, flying the gold and red of the Spanish crown. The Santa Maria, a ship of the line, built to crush hulls like eggshells. "Rojas didn't just invite us to a party," Eamon growled, his eyes narrowing. "He invited the Navy to clean up the mess." Sarah stood beside him, clutching the rail. The wind tore at her silk dress, the hem stained with harbor mud. She looked at the pursuing ship, then at Eamon. "We can't outrun a frigate," she stated, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Not with a damaged yard." "We can if we lose them in the open sea," Eamon said, though he knew it was a lie. The frigate had the weather gauge. They would be run down before sunset. "No," Sarah said, her eyes snapping to the west, toward a line of white water churning against jagged black rocks. "We have to go there." Eamon looked. "The Devil's Teeth? That's suicide, Sarah." "The charts mark that as impassable." "The official charts do," she corrected, stepping closer to him, her hand gripping his forearm. "But Uncle Esteban's smugglers use it to bypass the tax patrols. There is a channel. It's narrow, and it twists like a snake, but it's deep enough for the Tempest." Eamon looked at the reef. It was a graveyard of ships, a foaming maw of stone. Then he looked at the frigate bearing down on them. its bow chasers already flashing fire. He looked at Sarah. In her eyes, he didn't see the terrified girl who had flinched at his bootsteps. He saw a navigator. He saw a partner. "Maeve," Eamon roared. "Hard to starboard. Make for the reef." "You're mad," Maeve yelled back, staring at the rocks. "Trust her," Eamon commanded. "Sarah, take the con." The crew froze. A pirate captain yielding command to a governor's niece? It was mutiny. It was madness. Sarah didn't hesitate. She stepped up to the binnacle, her mind racing through the maps she had memorized in her uncle's study. Maps she had studied while dreaming of escape. "Starboard 2 points," she called out, her voice ringing clear. "Watch for the breaker with the white crest. We need to pass it on the left, close enough to touch." Eamon spun the wheel. The St. Tempest heeled over, groaning as she turned toward the rocks. Behind them, the Santa Maria hesitated. The Spanish captain knew the reputation of the Devil's Teeth, but pride and the governor's orders drove them on. The frigate turned to follow. "Steady," Sarah whispered, her eyes locked on the churning water. "Steady, now. Hard a port. Now, Eamon." Eamon threw his weight against the spokes. The ship swung violently, the hull scraping against a submerged rock with a sound like a dying scream. Splinters flew, but they cleared the spur. They were inside the reef now. The water was a chaotic swirl of currents. To the left and right, jagged monoliths of black rock rose like tombstones. "They're following," Baptiste yelled from the stern. The frigate had entered the channel, but the frigate was wider, deeper and heavier. "There," Sarah pointed to a gap that looked impossibly small. "The needle's eye. We fit, they don't." "Hold on," Eamon shouted to the crew. He aimed the bow at the gap. The ocean surged, pushing them forward. For a heartbeat, it looked like they would smash directly into the cliff face. Sarah didn't flinch. She held Eamon's gaze, nodding once. The St. Tempest shot through the gap. The rock walls so close, the yardarms scraped stone, sending showers of sparks raining down on the deck. They burst out into the open turquoise water of the lagoon on the other side. Behind them, a terrible grinding crunch echoed over the roar of the waves. The Santa Maria, trying to follow the turn, had caught her keel on the reef. Her mainmast shuddered and snapped, toppling forward in a tangle of rigging. The pursuit was over. The crew of the St. Tempest stood in stunned silence, looking at the crippled giant behind them, then at the slim woman in the torn green dress standing at the helm. Then a cheer erupted. It started with Baptiste and swept through the ship, a raw, guttural roar of victory. Eamon let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for a lifetime. He looked at Sarah. She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading, leaving her knees weak. He caught her before she fell, pulling her against his chest. "You navigated the Devil's Teeth," he murmured into her hair. "Remind me never to play cards against you." Sarah laughed, a breathless, sobbing sound of relief. "I told you, Captain. I noticed the knots." Night fell, bringing a calm that felt surreal after the violence of the day. The St. Tempest lay at anchor in a secluded cove on the far side of the island, hidden from the sea. The damage was manageable. The carpenter was already at work. The cook had roasted a pig in celebration. In the great cabin, the mood was quiet. Eamon and Sarah sat at the table. The forged ledger lay between them, useless now, a relic of a life left behind. Maeve knocked on the doorframe and entered, carrying a bottle of the captain's private reserve rum. She placed it on the table, along with 2 glasses. She looked at Sarah. For months, Maeve's gaze had been sharp, assessing, looking for the crack in the armor. Now, she looked at Sarah with something else. "To the navigator," Maeve said, raising an imaginary glass. Sarah flushed. "I just remembered a map, Maeve." "You steered us through hell," Maeve corrected, "and you didn't blink. That makes you crew." She nodded to Eamon and left the cabin, closing the door softly. Eamon poured the rum. He pushed a glass towards Sarah. "We are safe," he said, "for now. The Spanish will limp back to port. Rojas will be busy explaining his failure to the crown. We have time. Time for what? Sarah asked, taking the glass. Eamon looked at the amber liquid. This was the moment, the third goal he had set for himself. Keep her safe without owning her. Time to decide where you go, Eamon said. We are 2 days from Tortuga. I can set you up there, with the gold from the dowry chest, which we kept, by the way. You would be wealthy. You could buy a house. You could live without fear of the law or the sea or me. Sarah set her glass down. The silence in the cabin stretched tight. Is that what you want? She asked. To be rid of me? I want you to be free, Eamon said, his voice rough. You came to me in chains, Sarah. You stayed because of a trap. I don't want your life to be another cage, even if it's a cage I built. He stood up and walked to the stern window, looking out at the moonlit water. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. He wanted to beg her to stay. He wanted to tell her that the ship felt empty without her, that he felt empty without her. But he couldn't, not if he wanted to be better than the men who had traded her like cattle. He heard the rustle of silk. Sarah didn't walk to the door. She walked to him. She stopped beside him, looking out at the same moon. You think freedom is a place, she said softly. A house in Tortuga. A garden with high walls. She turned to face him. I lived in a house with high walls, Eamon. It wasn't freedom. It was a waiting room for death. She reached out and took his hand, the hand with the scar, the hand of a pirate. Freedom is choice, she said, and I am choosing. I don't want a safe harbor. I want the storm. And I want the man who taught me how to weather it. Eamon looked down at her. It's a hard life, Sarah. We will be hunted. We will be tired. We will be salt-stained and weary. Good, she whispered. I'm tired of being clean and terrified. She reached up, her fingers threading into the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him down. I am Serafina Rojas, she declared, her voice steady and proud, and I am the quartermaster of the St. Tempest. Unless the captain has an objection? Eamon Ironheart Drake, the Wolf of La Boca, smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and broke the last of the shadows there. No objections, he rasped. Welcome aboard. He kissed her, and this time, there was no desperation, no fear of the future. There was only the steady rhythm of the sea beneath their feet, the creak of the ship that was their home, and the promise of a horizon that belonged to no one but them. They had sailed through the teeth of the devil and come out the other side, not as a bargain, not as a captor and a captive, but as iron and the fire that forged it. Two souls finally, truly free. The sea stretched out before them, endless and wild. They turned the wheel together.